Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another book review. I recently finished Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez, and this was a pretty good book. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I honestly read this book because it fit some of the challenges that I'm trying to do for my 2026 reading journal, and I liked it more than I expected to. It is the first book in, I believe, a trilogy, and this one follows the characters Alexis, who is a 37-year-old woman from the big city, Minneapolis, and she pretty much has her life laid out for her already by her family, and she has no say in it. Then we have our male main character, who is Daniel, and he is a 28-year-old small town guy who's living out his family legacy. He runs a B&B for the town and is also a hobbyist woodworker. And he's also, I guess, the town mayor because everyone in town loves him. It's a very small town. Before reading this book, my first thought, so I read this on the Libby app, and my first thought when I opened the book to start reading it was, why is it so long? I don't remember how many pages it was on Libby, but it was longer than I expected it to be. But in reality, as I was reading it, it didn't feel like a very long read, and I read it fairly quickly. So the length didn't really have as much of an impact as I expected it to. There were some things that were excessive, like I didn't necessarily need a multi-page description of what his house looked like, but that did come back up later in the plot. And the author does have an attention to detail that is pretty appreciated and kind of hard to come by in a book, especially in this kind of genre. She's a very thoughtful author, even naming the fictional town in the book, which is Wakan. She actually donated money to the naming fundraiser for Native Languages of the Americas so that the town in her book would be named a word that the indigenous people that are local to the Minnesota area would actually use. And Wakan is the best known Dakota word for magic or spiritual, sacred, or wondrous, which I think is pretty cool. So, right at the beginning, Alexis spends a whole page. She basically gets stranded in this small town. Her car breaks down and she's hungry, so she walks into a bar and she spends a whole page saying that she's not going to sleep with Daniel and him saying that he doesn't expect her to. And then the next sentence is, I woke up the next morning at 6 a.m. naked and happy after having the best date of my entire life. And then I realized she was gone. And that's the last sentence of that chapter. So there was a little bit of whiplash going on there. It's like you both said that you didn't expect sex to happen, but then it immediately did. But reading on, it played out well, and it was a good setup for the rest of the plot. And it is a romance novel, so it's not necessarily like out of pocket for the book. It made sense. Alexis's ex-boyfriend was very abusive emotionally and psychologically, and he actually cheated on her with a coworker. They both work at the hospital. They're both doctors. He was a surgeon and she was an emergency department doctor, I believe. And after she broke up with him, she swore off men, and she still has to work with her ex at the hospital. He's the chief of surgery, and it's a family hospital for her. Like, her family name is the name of the hospital, so she's kind of like a legacy in that hospital, so she can't really get a job anywhere else. And she has a one night stand with Daniel after swearing off men from her ex, but she said it was the best sex of her life. She left in the middle of the night when she saw her driver's license and saw that he's almost 10 years younger than her, and she thinks that that's just unacceptable, and she gets really embarrassed, and so she leaves. As far as the spicy scenes go in this book, the first two scenes are closed door, and then they do get a little bit more explicit and detailed as the book goes on, but they do stay pretty mild overall. There's also a kind of hints at a magical aspect of this book. One of the characters, he's an older guy that the town kind of takes care of, Pops. He says that the town picks who it wants to stick around and will keep Alexis in the town if it wants her to stay. And that was kind of a fun touch. I like the idea of a town basically having a say in its residents. It's just a fun little magical aspect that I enjoy. Um, I think that a town should have a say in who gets to live there. Um, some of the magical aspects did seem a little bit out of place a little later in the plot, though. Like there are lightning strikes without clouds that cause a tree to block her into his driveway when she's trying to leave. Downpours without clouds that stop as soon as she goes back inside his house. Um, there's storm clouds when a character who is the abusive husband of Daniel's cousin shows up. And so it's like you get the hint that there is magic in this world, but also kind of not. Like it's a little bit, it almost feels out of place because it reads like a contemporary romance, but there's this slight magical aspect. I kind of just wish she would have focused a little bit more on the magic and just kind of highlighted that a little more. I will say I am feeling all kinds of frustrated with this book in certain ways. Um, I hate the part of the plot that involves her ex being abusive, partly because I hate that she doesn't tell Daniel everything about it. I don't like how much they don't talk about her relationship past and her problems with trusting other people. I don't like that they don't make decisions based on what's making them happy. They make decisions based on what they think is supposed to happen. And I understand that all of that is basically how things happen in reality, and people tend to focus on what they should do and not what makes them happy. But if this is going to be a fictional magical world, I just want the characters to be happy. I hate that she thinks that she has to end things with Daniel and isn't living her life for her. But throughout the book, you learn that her father's also abusive and controlling to both her mom and her. And so she doesn't really feel like she has the freedom of choice at all. And I understand all of these plots and focuses on abuse and how those are affecting her decision making. I worked as a domestic violence victim advocate for a few years. I was in abusive relationships myself when I was a teenager, so I get all of it. Just sometimes it's still frustrating to read. And sticking with the abusive parts of the plot, I do wish that there was a content warning up front for domestic violence and abusive relationships, because I don't really care to read plots in that subject too often. Again, I lived it. I worked in that area, so it's not necessarily a fun topic for me to read about. But that being said, this book and this author probably has the best and most accurate depiction of abusive relationships that I've read in a very long time, if not ever. And she even says in the acknowledgments that she consulted with victim advocates and survivors of abuse before and during her writing process for this book. And as someone who's been in those kinds of relationships and has worked in that space as a victim advocate, I really appreciate that level of research and upfront work for an author to do so that it is depicted in a proper way. There is a quote in this book that I really enjoy, which is said by her friend Bree, who she works in the hospital with. And she says, "You can decide to put yourself first. You do have a choice. It's not an easy choice. It's not without consequences, but you do have a choice." And I really think that that's an important message for a lot of people to hear. Also, Bree is actually the female main character for the second book in this series. So that's a fun touch. Overall, I would rate this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I don't know that I would reread it, but I will keep reading the series and I would recommend it to others. So if you have read this book or this series and you enjoyed it, or if you didn't, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. So leave a comment. Thanks for watching.